Hey everyone, welcome to our little webinar today. I'm Jason Odell. Thanks for joining me. We're here on Substack, so you probably know this by now, but somewhere over here, I have a newsletter called The Photographer's Perspective. I started that last year in January to publish more writings on photography, both casual and technical. Um, so I'm hoping that you've subscribed already. If you haven't done so, hit the subscribe button at the top of this live stream window. I would really appreciate that. I want to thank everyone who's also subscribed at whatever level you may have subscribed at. I try to keep a fair amount of content, including these live streams, free. I've got some more stuff in the works, and as a bonus to the generosity of my paid subscribers, all of the online classes that I present here on Substack, the recordings will be available for my paid subscribers to review in the archives at any time they want, plus other video content and more technical things. Today's I'm going to talk about the upcoming lunar eclipse, which is actually happening very early tomorrow morning, depending on where you live. So I want to be able to jump into that, and I am going to attempt to monitor to the over on the chat, but I've got three screens today and no producer, so I'm running this without any third party assistance. But thanks for everything that you guys do. I appreciate the subscribers, the likes. I was gone all last week. I'm back in the country now. Yay. Looking forward to taking a group to Spain for a photo tour of Spain and Portugal starting 18th of March. So if I'm not around much, it's because I'll be out of pocket. I'll be in Spain. But between now and then, I have a bunch of things I'm working on and lined up to present for you guys and to share with you guys, because this is my space where I get to talk about what I love the most, which is photography. Now, I it's so much stuff out there is overwhelming in terms of how much we're getting bombarded, whether you're on social media, on the news, whatever, it doesn't matter. So here we're just talking about taking pictures, and that's what I like about this stuff. So it's good to see everyone going on. Let me start off with my screen share so we can get right into it on how to photograph the total lunar eclipse. Okay, so let's start with this, and we'll go from there. I want to talk about when is it? Okay, that's kind of important. When it is, and where to find it. I'll include that in that first part. I've got some tips for you and some apps that I use, some resources for pre-visualizing and scouting the eclipse. What equipment you need. It's not terribly hard, but I'm going to touch on that for sure. I'll talk a little bit about the exposure and focus settings you want to do. It's not hardcore technical, but I want to also present some creative ideas, some ideas that you can use to approach the lunar eclipse a little differently. This whole thing with lunar eclipses, and when they're a total lunar eclipse, the moon will sort of go from orange, deep orange, almost red, and they call it the blood moon. All of this stuff started happening in the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. You hear about these super moons. Well, the moon's the moon. Total eclipse simply means that when the moon is full and the sun is on the opposite side of the earth, so it's illuminating the moon, the earth's shadow passes in front of the moon. And there's different stages of that. And sometimes it's partial, sometimes it's total. It depends on where you live, okay? The timing and how much of this eclipse you will see. But generally, the eclipse starts off kind of slowly as the shadow starts to creep across the moon. And then if you're somewhere where you can get totality, the moon will turn orange or red. So let's talk about when to see and when to view the eclipse. This is the current map of the of where you can see the eclipse, and it begins early tomorrow morning. So that's March 3rd. Today is, I can't believe we're already in March. So this is, today is March 2nd. So tonight or very early tomorrow morning, depending on where you go and where you live, um, and you may be able to see the eclipse. Now, this map, you can see there's different color shadings. Basically, those are the degree to which you will see the eclipse. So if you're anywhere in those red zones or those dark purple zones, you're going to be in the area where you will see totality. The red area, you're going to see the entire phase of the eclipse. So the shadow passing in and the shadow passing out. As you get farther east, what happens is it's happening early in the morning tomorrow. The moon is going to set, the sun's going to come up, and you will miss the back half of the eclipse. So I want to jump over to my web browser to show you. If you go to timeanddate.com, it's very cool. You can go and click on the total lunar eclipse, and it will show you where what the eclipse will look like based on your location. You tell it where you live. So I live in Colorado, near in Colorado Springs. I'm south of Denver, and it gives you this idea of what you can expect, and even gives you some previews of what it might look like. So here's the map of the eclipse, and you can see that. Whoops. I live right about here somewhere. There's Denver, that's close enough, and you can pull up the exact times. So the earliest part of the eclipse for me starts at 1:45 in the morning, and it peaks around 4 a.m. And with the maximum about 4:30. Okay, so here I can't see the full eclipse. I'm in this little pink zone here. That's because by this point the moon will be below the horizon. In fact, the moon will drop below our mountain ranges. More on that in a minute. But you can click on this interactive map. You can see exactly. So if I were living, say, in New York, you could see that the eclipse, the full the maximum is around 6 in the morning. Well, this is right coinciding with sunrise, so it's going to be a little bit tricky for you to get that full blood moon. But if I were in, let's say, Juneau, um, you could see the full range of the eclipse, with the maximum being around 2 in the morning, so time zone dependent here. And if you're in Europe, sorry, you can't see this eclipse. I apologize, but that's just the way the universe works sometimes. It's just physics, and astronomy. So, timeanddate.com, go go look for the eclipses, and then you can get the total lunar eclipse. You also find out information on the upcoming other events like solar eclipses, depending on where you are. So here's that total lunar eclipse, and if we play this, you get an idea of how it's going to look in your area. Kind of neat that we have these interactive tools. Okay, so that's when it's happening. Now, what I also want to think about, because we're going to go out and take a picture of the moon, right? I'm going to get to that. But you need to know where to look. Okay. So, where's the moon? Now, duh, you look up in the sky. But if you know where it's going to be relative to your home, your position, you may choose to go to a different place to watch the eclipse. And I use a couple of different tools. This one's called the Photographer's Ephemeris, or Photo Ephemeris, or the app is called TPE, the Photographer's Ephemeris. And you can punch in any location, anytime, and you'll see that it actually has the eclipse information. This is a screenshot from it, where you can look. And this is approximately where I live, or not where I live, but where I want to go to shoot the eclipse. Now, as a photographer, I'm thinking about, if I just wanted to see the eclipse, I just need a clear sky and somewhere to see it. But you've also got to factor in things like light pollution and foreground objects on your horizon. Now, where I live, if I go and start looking to the west, we've got the mountain ranges. Let me pull up the Photographer's Ephemeris online and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this here's where I want to want to view the eclipse from. And if I go down here to where the earliest part of the eclipse starts, you can see the moon. This is this gray, bluish gray line right here. That's the moon. So you can see it's going to be in the southwest. But by the time the eclipse goes total, about 5 in the morning, 4:35 in the morning, you can see that the moon is just basically south of, it's just barely south of west, so here's due west. So that means there's going to be objects on the horizon that would potentially either block the view or, if you think about it, could be part of your shot if you're willing to go with something a little wider. And the biggest feature here in Colorado Springs is 14,100 and I think 114 feet is Pikes Peak. So if you wanted to get a shot of the moon over Pikes Peak, when would that be? Well, it would probably be. Let me pull up the uh, the chart. I can slide this back, and that moon is going to be right over Pikes Peak from this angle, right about 4 in the morning. Okay, so it will be in totality right about there, and you can see it's going right over Pikes Peak. So I use this tool as one way of pre-visualizing. Now another tool that I might use, what if you're not able to go out and scout your location? There's things you can do. So I have a pretty good idea that I need to be looking to the west. This shows me where the moon is going to be. Those orange lines are the sun. It's not up yet. Um, but what if I want, where is it going to be in the sky? Because what we're not seeing here is the angle, the height. Is the moon directly overhead? I've done those. Those are hard because you got to have your tripod set straight up. It can be really, really tricky. Um, so where relative in the sky are we looking? For that, we're going to use some different kinds of apps. And I'm going to go to my phone and I'm going to try this for the first time is to show you my phone live in real time right here. So I got my phone, okay, and I happen to have an iPhone, but there is the TPE app which I can use, but there's another ephemeris app that I will use, and that's called TPE 3D. It's a 3D app. And what I've done is I've just pinpointed more or less the overlook that I like to shoot that looks over and has Pikes Peak in the background. And that's where that little red dot is that says B on there. Okay. And if I double tap it, it takes me right there. Okay. I can zoom out a little bit. You can see the constellations. And this is at, I've done the time. So I'm at 4, 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. Now, what you're seeing right there, where that orange line intersects, that's about where Pikes Peak is. So if I zoom in, this is really cool. This not only tells me where the moon is at about 4:30. Okay, so there's peak eclipse is right around 5 a.m. But you'll notice that it shows, you can see the moon there. Um, I'm trying real hard to zoom in, but do you see how it shows you it says 43 millimeters on the bottom of the screen there? Can you see that? That's the effective focal length. That if I were on 35 millimeter, that's what it would be like. So if I wanted to frame the shot, what does this tell me? Well, I could get Pikes Peak in the lower corner. There's the moon up there. This is a 45 millimeter or so. So a 50 millimeter lens, give or take, or a little bit later, it might be, closer to 5 a.m., the moon's going to be coming down lower. So I know if I go out there with, say, a 45, 50 millimeter lens and frame this shot vertically, I might, if I know what I'm doing, I'm not freezing out there, I might be able to get the moon and my foreground element in the shot, which would be kind of cool. So that is my goal for this evening, other than setting an alarm for 3 a.m. and waking up, which I hate doing. Now, there's another app out there which is kind of cool. You may have heard of. It's called Photo Pills. And Photo Pills lets you go and plan things out, and it's the same idea. It gives you the times and the places. So if I go to this is showing today, so I went to moon. So I'll go back. I'm going to choose moon, and then I'm going to fast forward to tomorrow, March 3rd, and it says 4:30 9 a.m. full moon. Okay, so that's close enough. Now I'm going to type that time. I'm going to hit that time. And now what I'm going to do is there's this, if you look at the bottom screen there, it has a menu and it says calendar, info, blah. There's a thing called AR. What is AR? Augmented reality. How cool is that? So watch what happens. I'm going to point towards my window here, hit AR, and look at that. Now, it's a really great view out of my window here, okay? But there's the moon superimposed on my view. So if I were to use this app and go scout my location, um, which I could theoretically do this afternoon, I could hold my phone, pull up the AR, and pretty much get an idea of exactly where that moon is going to be. So this Photo Pills app is quite useful for that reason. Okay, let's go back to where we're at. Okay, and my presentation. So those are my apps. What do you need? Well, this is one of those times where if you want close-up shots of the moon, you're probably not going to get iPhone shots. Now, you can try it. I'm not saying you shouldn't try that, but controlling exposure with your phone is very hard because the sky is going to be extremely dark. Your phone's going to be in night mode. And what happens is normally the moon is just going to blow itself out. It's just going to be a white, blown out region on your photo. Now, with the eclipse, the moon gets kind of dark. So you might be able to try it. It's worth a shot. So that night mode for your phone could work. But a DSLR or a mirrorless interchangeable lens camera is going to be your friend. Okay. And if you want to get the close up shots of the moon, you really need something that works out to like at least 300 millimeters in terms of lens focal length. Okay. 300 millimeters really isn't that long when it comes to shooting the moon. You might find yourself having to crop. The other things you'll need, you definitely want to use a tripod here. We're talking about telephoto, especially if you want shots that are close up of the moon. Too much motion, it's dark, the moon is dark. Even with good image stabilization systems, a tripod with a ball head or even a gimbal head, if you've got a big lens, that's going to be your friend. And then if you've got a remote release cord, we used to call them a cable release, or the wireless remote, or even triggering it with your phone, you can use your phone's smartphone, your camera's smartphone app to trigger so that you're not jiggling anything when you're taking the actual picture. Okay, so here's a shot where I used, and this is basically the full frame. Um, I had a 600 millimeter lens and I had a 1.4 teleconverter. So that's the equivalent of 850 millimeters focal length. And it still doesn't fill the frame. It's still not like a telescope. And this is your regular full moon. Okay. So with the eclipse, it gets darker. You got to worry about all of these things. And you also have to deal with the fact that the moon moves. It's in orbit, but the Earth is rotating, so that apparent motion is quite fast. And if you just set up and lock your tripod down and wait a few minutes, you're going to find the moon is moved out of your shot. It's going to be out of the viewfinder all of a sudden. So you got to be prepared for that. So these are the challenges you have when taking photos of the moon, regardless if it's an eclipse or not. Okay. So it's going to move. And if you're using like 400, 500, 600 millimeter effective or equivalent focal length, it's going to move very fast across the frame. That also has other implications, meaning that the moon's moving. You need a fast enough shutter speed to freeze that motion. Okay, it's not like a athlete going to be blurring, but you can't do really long exposures of the moon because it's going to move. And so having a tripod that's tall enough, depending on how high you need to aim, if it's a big lens, one of those gimbal heads, but just a tripod with a ball head will work. Okay, it's just going to make things easier depending on how much other gear you have. And the other thing I like to do when I'm shooting with photos of the moon is forget trying to use the viewfinder, because a lot of times, especially if you're pointed up, how do you get your head underneath that viewfinder? You got to crane your neck, right? And it's cold and it's dark. It's a pain. So if your camera has a tilt out or flip out LCD, live view mode, that's your friend, okay? Because now you can just compose the shot looking at the screen on the back without having to contort your neck around. Okay. Um, Now, the moon is moving fast, um, and depending on how depending on your camera, how you set it up, you're going to want to use manual exposure mode most of the time. Because if you're, let's say, well, and I'm going to back up for a second. If you're trying to expose for the moon, the spot meter works great, but usually the spot meter is linked to the center of your camera's focusing area. So if you're metering the moon directly, great. But if the moon moves and you're using an auto exposure mode, now your spot meter just sees black sky. The next thing you know, your exposure gets all messed up. So using a fixed ISO and manual exposure can be useful, because then your exposure doesn't change. Okay. What about focusing on the moon? I'll get back to the other exposures. Um, it's not terribly hard to do this, especially if you're using a tripod. Again, handheld, not recommended. You can use autofocus, works just great. But then once you've got the focus locked in, especially if you start early, if you're trying to get the entire series of the eclipse, the moon's going to be nice and bright, very easy to focus on. It's going to get dark. And then it becomes harder to focus on. Now, if your camera is set up that every time you half press the shutter, it tries to autofocus, guess what? Your camera can get lost because the camera tries to refocus every time. So, what can you do? Once you've set the focus, you can either just put the camera in manual focus, and now it's not going to move because you're not turning the lens. That will lock the focus on the moon. Or you can do what I usually do, which is I don't use the shutter button for autofocus. I have my AF on button on the back of the camera. My camera has a button on the back here. It says AF on. And so I will use that, focus, and then now when I half press that shutter or use the shutter release, the camera will not try to refocus and it won't get lost in the dark. If you're really struggling, put the focus point on the edge of the moon rather than directly on it. That'll give it an edge to look for to get sharper focus. Live view, that's I already mentioned. And then let's loop back to exposure. Now, if you're just shooting the full moon without an eclipse, it's what we call a sunny 16 exposure. It's like the moon is bright like a bright blue sky day outside. And Sunny 16 is an exposure rule I talked about in one of my online classes. I'll probably do again. But it just means that if you were to set the aperture at f16 and the shutter speed at your equivalent of your ISO, so let's say it was ISO 400, 1/400th of a second at f16, that's pretty bright. But during the eclipse, the moon gets very dark, especially during totality. So that exposure rule does not work for eclipses. So you're going to have to boost your ISO way up. You're going to get up there, 3200, 6400. Don't be afraid of that. Okay? I encourage everyone to just accept the fact that if it means you're getting a sharp shot, shoot at the higher ISO. You can clean up the noise in post. If your camera has spot meter, you could spot meter on the moon and then manually set the exposure, fixed ISO, fixed shutter speed, fixed aperture. The auto modes can get really confused. That's why your phone gets confused when it's a very dark background with a single bright object. Okay? Now, you can let your shutter speed go down fairly slow because you're on a tripod. However, that moon is moving. So I usually find that if you can keep the shutter speed to 1/10 of a second or faster as your lower limit, you'll get sharper shots. And this is where everything comes into play. You're not jiggling the camera. It's locked on a tripod. You're using a remote release or a trigger from your smartphone. Okay. And if you don't have a smart release, your camera may have something called exposure delay mode. That's a Nikon thing. But it might also have a 2-second self timer. Use the timer and just make sure that the timer isn't set to try to focus every time. You want to just lock that focus down. So press the button, the camera jiggles, but then it waits 2 seconds. Now everything is stable, it's settled in, takes the photo. Okay, so that's where we're at right with the exposure. Now that's just for shooting the moon. If you're shooting it in more of a landscape setting, like I'm thinking about trying, the exposure can differ a little bit. And in that case, you're going to want to definitely make sure that if the moon is bright, you're not blowing it out because it's going to be a relatively small object in the frame if you've got it in this landscape scenario. If you're doing the tight shot, you just expose for the moon and everything else is black. It's no problem. Now, this is what I'm talking about. This is a shot I got from a lunar eclipse quite quite some years ago. But that moon is going to get dark. So you can see here we're just approaching totality on this. The moon is bright on that right hand side, but the red is starting to come in. So this is where you're going to be just going, all right, I'm looking at my exposure. I'm constantly checking my camera settings to make sure my shutter speed isn't dropping down too slow. And I'm going to keep boosting my ISO so that I can freeze the action and still get a good exposure. Now, what about some creative things? I told you I wanted to get creative tonight, or yeah, tomorrow morning, technically. Um, you don't have to shoot everything as a tight full frame shot of the moon. In fact, you might not have a super telephoto lens, right? So you could set up possibly a shorter focal length. You could even have, if you got two tripods, you could set two up, one for the long telephoto shots, one for the wide shots. And if you're somewhere where you're able to capture the entire sequence, starting from the full moon, and you can see this sequence here, um, going from partial eclipse to totality, which again is going to be over the course of about 2 hours. I think it's like a couple hours to get from the start to the middle, and then you could even do the other side as the moon leaves the Earth's shadow. You could take shots every you know few minutes or even every 10 minutes, every 20 minutes, whatever, just to get a couple. And you can do that automatically or you can do it manually. If your camera has a feature called an intervalometer, interval timer shooting, you could just say, I'm going to set this up on a tripod with a kind of wide view. That moon's going to move. So you want a wider angle lens, but you're going to get the moon as it comes down through the sky, and that phase of the eclipse is going to change with each shot. And then when you're done, you can put them all into Photoshop and composite them. That's a different lesson. Okay, but that's basically how I made this composite of a sequence of images of the moon in one photo showing the sequence. I've seen some people who've done some wonderful stuff with compositing. Again, it's really tricky because you don't always know how to frame everything. So, it's that trade off between having a tight enough shot where the moon is a large enough subject, but also giving enough space in the frame so it can travel through your scene and you don't have to keep reframing every time. Okay. And it all depends. If you want to have, a foreground, then you don't really want to reframe every time. If you're just cool with the moon in space and you have a composite, then it matters less. Okay. You want to learn more on night sky shooting? I do have some resources, and one of those resources is an ebook that I published quite a while back. It's still effectively up to date as far as the settings go. Things change with time a little bit on rules of thumb, but I have a book called the Night Sky Photography Handbook. It's on my website. And I've set up a promo code for a discount for all of you guys who are attending my webinar today. I appreciate that. So if you go and you want to buy this book, it's like $15, and I've got I think a 15 or 20% discount on it for all of you guys. Just put in the code, what is it, Blood Moon, and you get a discount on this. It's a PDF, it's printable, you can download it, and it has not only things about shooting the moon, it doesn't really talk about eclipse, but it has all the stuff for how to capture the Milky Way and star trails. And if you're into astro night sky photography, it's a really good resource. So, and then before I sign off or take some questions, I do want to just remind everyone that I have a couple of workshops open here in the U.S. that I have seats still available for. These are all going forward as planned. You can meet me down in South Florida to take pictures of birds. Um, and it's an awesome spot. I did a webinar on that a couple of weeks ago. You can find it in my Substack if you just go look through my posts, look through the articles that I published, and there's a replay of that. And then I'm doing a fine art landscape safari in the Badlands. And the cool thing about that one, which is in late September, is we're going to have a full moon. No eclipse, but we're going to have a full moon. And so you can get landscape shots with that moon rising over the amazing rock formations in the Badlands. So that's what I've got for today. And so I hope that, I appreciate everybody coming in. I hope that's informative. We got, I'm just looking at my laptop here. I got 48 people in the chat. That's awesome. And I really appreciate everybody. It's good to see a lot of familiar names, Robes that's out there. And, oh, Eric, you're getting fancy. Yeah, one of the things you can do nowadays, they have these motorized equatorial mounts like you might use for a telescope that you can program, and it will literally just follow the moon. And that's cool because then you can do long exposure or exposure stacking and all kinds of stuff, and it keeps the celestial object, whether it's a planet or a star or the moon in this case, centered in your frame. That's really cool. I don't have one of those, unfortunately, but that's a really cool toy to have. Does anybody have any questions for me in the chat? I'm going to just try to rearrange some screens here, and just type them in there, and I will do my best to answer. I'm just going to move my laptop so I can actually see the darn thing. There we go. So if you've got questions, this is a great time for them. Um, trying to do this like I might do office hours or something back when I was teaching. Let's see. I'm just going to see if I can scroll through the chat too. It's just great to see all the people here, and I recognize a lot of names. Alan is here, and Ginger. Hey, Ginger, and who else is here? Oh, Noble's here, and that's cool. And this is great. So photographers on Substack. We're here. We don't have a we don't have our own category in art and whatever it is, art and creative things. So if you like this content, um, I've sort of made this my new online home. It's where I spend most of my time trying to generate things. So I really, really appreciate all the likes and the subscribers. Thanks again. And look for more stuff. I've got some more articles coming out this week. And this week is Car Week. Or starting on Friday is Car Week. My friend Josh Weinberg is doing that one. So he started this. So if you've got a car photo, we talked about it in one of my podcasts a few weeks ago. Got a car photo, have a post ready to go for Friday morning. Tag Josh in that, and he'll try to share as many as he can. So that's where we're at with it's where photography is right now here on Substack. So thanks everyone. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, don't forget to subscribe. I'm Jason Odell. My newsletter is The Photographer's Perspective. It's where I try to share what I love doing the most. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.